What's going on, 3DMJers? I'm here with my brother from another mother, Alberto Nunez, and I don't know. I almost pronounced that like we were from Spain. That's not the right version of the Spanish accent. So, you recently made a video for our YouTube channel of you being backstage at the 2021 WNBF Worlds. And it was, dude, it was awesome. And it was awesome for me to watch because way back when, we're talking pre-Team 3DMJ, when it was just the 3DMJ blog by Mr. Jeff Alberts, his goal was to give some shine to the natural lifter. And this was a time period really before YouTube had blown up. This was a time period before there was, kind of mainstream social media. And there were just blogs and websites, right? So Jeff was like, the primary place where we get to display physiques is the muscle magazines, which are primarily dominated by the IFBB and NPC. And much love to our enhanced, brothers and sisters in arms, if you know what I'm saying, and quads. But there wasn't really a place to celebrate kind of the natural side of the sport. And so Jeff was part of the movement to do that. And that was 3D Muscle Journey. It wasn't just himself, but it was also the natural movement. And when we became Team 3DMJ in late '09, our primary purpose was not to become a coaching company, but more so to continue that tradition and do it as a team. And just to give people an idea of the challenge of the pre-social media era, we would struggle with, like, is it cool if we take pictures at these shows or interview people? Because that was something that was kind of quote unquote behind a paywall at the time, because, people who did photography at the shows kind of had, they were the only ones really presenting that. Now everyone is their own, publicist with social media, so it's much less of an issue. But yeah, the whole first thing we wanted to do was cover shows, cover powerlifting meets, and give some shine to natural athletes. So it was just really good. It's a long-winded way of saying I love that video. It felt like a hearkening back to our roots. And I just wanted to ask you kind of, what was that experience like? What did you think going into it? And what was your goal of creating that video?
Man, well, I think the first version of bodybuilding that I fell in love with was just bodybuilding in general, It's like, yeah, initially, you want just a nice little physique, you want to be a little bit better, but then, especially, when you've grown up playing sports your whole life, it's like, okay, so I want that next thing. Let me look into the competitive side of this. And I remember, I really just wanted to make sure I looked right before I actually got on that stage. And one thing I kept hearing was that, like, whatever, like, even that guy that looks like not so impressive on stage, he probably looks like he would stand out in your gym, like if he was just there training with everyone else. So I'm like, shoot, so there's no one doing this. And then finally I did find it was a group of people who were doing it. And it was called Repitrope was the name of the website. And
I think I used to call it repeat rope, which I'm sure it was not.
No one knew no one knew. Like it was.
Yeah, it was REPET. Yeah. So, and then
yeah, it's rep, and then they put an E, and then like trope. So, but you remember all the backstage pictures were, I think, especially impressive. It's like they'd have the guys with the blue background, and I take it as they were like this close to getting up on stage. They just kind of got the camera near them and told them to do their thing. And that just gave you an extra appreciation for those physiques. So got myself a nice little camera now. And I'm like, okay, you know what? Like, I think anyone who's competed, your first like little like anxiety moment that like everyone looks amazing is like backstage at a show, right? Like you're like, oh, I'm the pretty fit guy at my gym. And this is like a reunion of all the fit guys at their gyms, and everyone looks amazing. And, you forget what you even look like for a minute there. But backstage, like up close and personal, like you can really appreciate these physiques. So that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to get up close and personal and have people just really appreciate the finer details in these physiques. Because, when we're backstage, man, we're still fans. Like we're there with our athletes, but, every once in a while you look up and you're like, whoa, like you see that dude bending down to get something from his gym bag, and there's all this like like stuff down his leg, right? So I wanted the people who have never experienced that to get a taste for that, to see just how I guess impressive because I think outside of the bodybuilding world, it's like going the enhanced route is the road less taken. It's like it's if you're not in there, like you don't understand like the finer details behind that decision. But within the sport itself, like once like you are part of the bodybuilding family, I think going the natural route is probably the road like less taken. So I wanted like we're the weirdos, we're the rebels within the confines of the sport. So I wanted to just let people see that like, damn, like you can build a pretty damn impressive physique going down this route. And again, like big thank you to all those guys who were just so like courteous, like and were very welcoming as I was like there all up in their business, and they were like minutes away from jumping on that stage, and it was going to be the biggest show of their careers up until this point. So big thank you to those guys, because I mean they put in the work. It was their work, and thankfully again I get to go to these things and appreciate their little art projects.
Absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, for one, big shout out to the WNBF for letting you do that. Shout out to Nick Colville of Better Aesthetics, who is the one who does a lot of, if not all of the big show multimedia, and being gracious enough to allow you to do that. Big shout out, like you said, to all the athletes backstage. And also a big shout out to you, Berto, because you very carefully thought, this is a event where there are people from all over the world, some of them who don't speak English, who are not aware of who I am, instead of kind of having that little mentality of like, I'm Alberto Nunez. Everyone knows who I am. I can go where and do anything. Maybe having a dude trolling backstage with the camera, with people that you don't know who you are, I should check in with them first. And that's why you didn't do all the female competitors, because that could have come off with big time creeper vibes. And so thank you for making that decision so that we didn't get canceled in 2022. But hopefully now that you've put out the video, that you talked about that specifically as to why you did the male division this year, now that it's established and you've done it, I'm really hoping we can also see all of the female divisions, because they're just as impressive but in different ways, which I think will be really cool and very inspiring for female physique competitors to see as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. That was really hard to do, and I had some athletes there, and I could have recorded them, but I'm like, oh, then it would have been like super 3D muscle journey show only, But yeah, no, just as amazing on that side. And I think especially when it comes to women, it's just a much more loaded decision. Like if you want to go enhanced, so I think at some point being able to showcase what these women have been able to do with their physiques, without the assistance of super supplementation, I think will be very, very helpful and eye-opening to a lot of people.
So let's talk about that. So it sounds like a big part of your motivation to do this was not just like, hey, I want to showcase the sport we love, but also to talk about the viability as an option for competitors. And you're 100% right that the bodybuilding, like the entire, like if we were to take that whole culture, and by the way, if you ever read papers, sociologists love bodybuilders because we're so freaking weird. We're such an aberrant little counterculture to the normal society. There's all kinds of stuff written about us and all kinds of stuff that's not nutrition and exercise science journals that I come across, because I regularly am doing like literature searches for bodybuilding papers. But anyway, weird, aberrant side culture of muscle worshipers. We sit within that as the natural bodybuilding community. Yeah. But as a whole, it is this counterculture, generally not accepted by society. And it existed pre-steroids. But once steroids came into it, now it was this like counter drug acceptance culture that is getting freakier by the decade as the pharmaceutical use increases, and as that becomes an accepted part of the sport, and as it moves further and further away from health, if we talk historically. So it's this weird thing where natural bodybuilding is a resurgence of some of the original aspects of bodybuilding within a counterculture. So now we're counter to the main culture. So while natural bodybuilding is something most people haven't heard of, and when they hear of it, they go, oh, that's better than I thought bodybuilding was. That's like your standard Janet or Bob responding. But within the bodybuilding community, like, you'd be surprised how many IFBB pros, trainers, and people in the larger bodybuilding world don't even know what these little farm leagues are doing. They have no idea about us, right? And it is the exception, I would say. Like, for example, the late, great, rest in peace, John Meadows, who is aware and connected with the natural side of the sport. And there are a few standouts of people who kind of view it as this, two different types of the same sport, like Formula One versus NASCAR. It's just different fuels, which is kind of the way I see it. But on that side, I think we're sometimes viewed as farm leagues at best, or completely ambivalent, ignorant, or apathetic towards it at worst. So it's this funny thing where it is exactly like that. So it's frustrating too, because sometimes I feel like, I don't know if you ever feel like this, Berto, but I feel like when it comes to the comment sections, we just can't win unless we're talking to ourselves. Because if we're speaking to the broader bodybuilding community, or people who are used to watching IFBB pros, you're swimmers, you're trash, you're only doing this because you don't have the genetics to compete in the IFBB. These are bodybuilders, lol. Do you even lift? And then if we get people on there who are not part of that, then it's like steroids, fake natties. If they're plugged into the general, kind of fitness community, which has had multiple kind of, I would say, deserved witch hunts, because there's a lot of people who are like, yes, I'm on this supplement, or please buy this program, and I'm on just a little bit of Anavar, and like the standard kind of fitness model who like you said does super supplementation, versus the completely full on pharmaceutical polypharmacy that IFBB pro bodybuilders have been doing for decades. And so it's this shitty place in the middle. And I think one easy way to combat that, not to combat that, that's the wrong term, to speak to the specific population you're trying to do, is to do just that. You said, hey, people who are considering potentially competing, there's some pretty impressive physiques out there, and here they are at the highest level. So it's an interesting message, because, I think a lot of people, if they would see this video and come across it, especially on YouTube, they would be expecting it to be either one of two things. It is a natty or not call out, or it is a counter to the natty or not call out. But what you were saying, and what you started with, is you're saying, hey, I know there's a lot of bodybuilders who maybe are thinking about competing and are thinking about going on sauce, who don't consider natural bodybuilding a viable route because it's not impressive enough. And I think that's really interesting, because there's a lot of people who come from that within the bodybuilding community who would just be like, no, these physiques are impossible with gear. And you were saying, no, look, that's like, if you're in the know, like, there are people who are just walking around an NCAA, football field, who don't even lift weights consistently, or don't just eat McDonald's, who have comparable physiques to some of this,
Yeah.
And you're saying, hey, no, there is some damn talent in natural bodybuilding, and we're going to get a close-up look at it.
Yeah. No, some of these guys, man, it's like they don't even know how talented they are, because they've, have always had this ability. And I remember, actually, at some point I was from the perspective that, hey, I'm gonna do a little bit of this natural bodybuilding thing just so that I can say that I did, and that I didn't rush into that, and that I learned my basics, and eventually that led to me making my pro debut, getting my butt whipped like pretty unanimously, and I'm like, oh wow, like, okay, first of all, there's some like pretty stout competition here. But then also, I think that year specifically made me realize how much I didn't know, how this instrument that I had thought I had mastered all the way through, that I wasn't done learning. And I applied some new approaches that year, mostly counting calories, like for the first time ever. I thought I was exempt from that. And I was blown away with what I could do with my own physique. But for a minute there, I was on the fence as well. I was like, okay, like, cause it's so normalized, I remember, the old forums used to hang out in. Like, every once in a while, like one of our bros there would make the jump, and it was his vlog as he was, starting down that path. And, interesting as hell, man. Interesting, like 100%. But I thought that was just like the proper next step for me. And I think a lot of people, that are like in that gym rat culture, who are approaching that point where they're like, I think I want to try this competitive bodybuilding thing. I guess they think that's just something that you have to do in order to do it correctly. And more than anything, I just wanted people to know that, hey, we do have this option here. It can be quite appealing, and they both have their pros and cons, right? Like that side has its pros, its cons. We have our pros and cons. So just something to throw into your pot of ideas, basically.
That's a great way to put it, because like the counter arguments fall apart pretty quick. The one I've heard is, we don't like it starts with, half these guys and gals are cheating, and it's like, well, like let's really assess the likelihood of that. And let's really talk about like what we've seen historically in terms of the physiques that have been around. And if it is true that the levels of cheating are as rampant as they are, it's actually somehow selecting for people with terrible genetics, because they're only achieving things that were already achieved, even in outlier cases, with cheating, like all of the study and research and advances and everything we've done collectively as a community to talk about lifting, training, contest prepping better, all the work we've done, guess what? It's getting people to similar to what's already been done in some extreme examples without drugs, because at that time, drugs didn't even exist. So I think what you eventually have to get to is, okay, there's an unknown amount of cheating in natural bodybuilding. However, it is not sufficient to create the same physiques as are in the IFBB, because when you have the same height, WNBF world champion compared to Mr. Olympia, there's an 80-pound difference in them, like on average most of the time. So they're cheating, but it doesn't matter, is ultimately what it comes down to. Or it doesn't matter enough to make it a non-level playing field. And I think that's really what I think athletes care about, is there a place for me and the choices I make to have good competitiveness? Because that's what a competitive spirit wants. It wants to go in the arena and have a challenge and have a chance to come out on top, right? That's what we seek. We want other people to be at their best. I want to be at my best, and I want to see who has the mettle to come out if we're actually talking about a competitive sport. I want an environment that pushes me to be my best. So if the argument is, hey, there's this cheating, we don't know about it, you should just go compete where they don't test. Well, actually, now you have a less even playing field. I can't tell you how many people I know who, on the forums back in the day, were talking about, being very competitive at the national level in the NPC. Like, I'm thinking of a very specific person. He was a lightweight, and he placed for the first time in the top 5 in NPC nationals and was posting about it on the forums and said, I'm going to retire. And my response, being an ignorant younger man at the time, I was like, what are you talking about, bro? Like, you're only 4 places away from an IFBB pro card, and then you got the whole pro division. And he was like, yeah, but I'm not willing to do what it takes to get to that level. And I'm like, what do you mean? You're killing it, you're crushing it, like you're dying. And he's like, no, bro, I don't want to take that much gear. And I was like, oh, right. So there are financial constraints, there are health constraints, and you have to be, like, if you want to, it is a level playing field, if you're willing to do the things that everyone else is willing to do in that sport. And I would say, I think, we've talked about this before, Berto, neither one of us has a moral opposition to the use of anabolic steroids on the personal level. We only want people to compete based on the rules of where they're competing. And we personally, I would think, at least for me, one of the main reasons I chose to be in tested organizations is because I don't want to have to be faced with that choice when my genetics, my lifting, my training, or all the things that I think I'm doing right, because of course we're always learning, and there is always room for improvement to some degree at least, has taken me a certain level, because it'll always give me that little nagging doubt, like, well, what if I just hopped on more? What if I just upped the dose? What if I just upped the dose, then one day I look like Dave Palumbo? So like, that's not that was not a decision I wanted to be faced with. I wanted to have a nice line in the sand so that I could have a competitive environment. And I'll tell you, I have had a good experience competing in natural bodybuilding as someone with, I would say, within the context of competitive bodybuilding, because I do acknowledge maybe I have, slightly better muscle building genetics than just the average gym rat. But in the context of bodybuilding, I would say I'm relatively average in terms of my talents. And I've been able to get to a reasonably high level with more room to improve. So if it's not like, if I feel like I'm getting to be competitive, I'm sure, most other people do as well. So I think it's viable. And I don't feel that way. Like, I am absolutely not willing to do what it would take for me to have even a sniff of competitiveness in the NPC or the IFBB. So anyway, I think it's one thing to say that, but it's another thing to visually see that up close, like you did with that video, and to give people with a competitive spirit, a place where they can go, you know what? I think with 10 years of hard training, my physique could stack up with that. I find that quite inspiring, and I would love to be on one of these videos one day.
Yeah. And those guys were outliers, but like I said, it's like, even on the enhanced side, I mean, those are the guys, like, it was Ronnie Coleman that, like, you and I grew up with, and, we admired the guy and his physique and his hard work. So to me, it was just like, that's kind of, besides the point. Going back to what you said about, like, just that competitive drive, I think both you and I, during certain legs of competition season, it's like we've gone the extra mile, like, right, to just be a little bit better, right? It's like sometimes in hindsight, it's like, oh, did we go too far? Like, you get into it, man, and you do what it takes as a competitor. And I know for me, that was something that I assume was going to happen at some point. Even if I would have been a minimalist when it came to my usage, there most likely would have been a threshold I would have had to go beyond in order to get what I want. And with being a competitive person, it's like how am I going to tell myself no, like, in that moment? When that might be the difference between first call out and that pro card maybe, right? So it's, I guess the dirty work is just a little bit more simpler when it comes to this side of things. It's still dirty at times. It has its small print, of course, but it's so much more straightforward. And I think, I guess we understand the consequences a little bit better. And I was, that brought me a lot of security to me personally. Another thing that I brought up was, I guess, like, this is for us. Imagine for, like, women, like, it's a whole different kind of worms. And I'm just so ignorant to that side sometimes. And like, for me, and this is one of the reasons, like, that next time I want to film these women so that the bodybuilding, hopeful bodybuilders, people who are on the fence as to, like, whether or not they want to compete, so that they can look at it, at the physiques. I've just, over the last 5 years especially, like, there's been enough horror stories where it's not necessarily their decision all the way, like,
or they don't know the decision they're making.
They don't know. They don't
really have true informed consent before kind of making that decision, for sure.
Yeah. And I've known a few women who, like, in hindsight, it was the wrong call. And, like, okay, so that chapter of their life is over. But here they are with, like, these permanent side effects that they're just going to have to live with the rest of their lives. And, and again, it's like there's a lot of women who make that decision, but it's their decision, Right. And they get to that point where, they, in order to be competitive at the next level, they do what they have to do, but they understand that 100%. But there's also a lot of women who don't. And I thought that was highly important as well. Because for us, it's like, had we tried that route, and then when we were done, and, hopefully the inside's still looking good, it's like, okay, so we have, a slightly more squared face, like, we're okay with that. That actually looks okay. A little extra facial hair, I actually can grow a full beard. Okay, not too bad. Some back hair, a little annoying, but whatever. But it's just,
I took the hair on the top of my head and I just put it on my back and face. And you know what? That was worth a good, fun career in the IFBB.
I might have not had this going on right now, right? Like that sort of deal. But it's just so different for women, you know. And I think that's why I think especially for them, it's important to just get the message out that, hey, you know, you can do it this way. It's got a different learning curve. It takes a little bit longer. Obviously there's some small print too, right? Like, you know, when it comes to especially contest dieting and health, right? But,
sure.
But, you know, again, we at least understand that side a little bit more, and it's a little bit more predictable, generally speaking. So, you know, again, it's like people are going to make their decisions, but we just want everyone to be well informed, because it's funny, like we're like the sex talk that like parents don't have with their children, like within the natural bodybuilding, within the bodybuilding world. It's like no one really ever tells you.
Definitely,
you know?
There's definitely a group of people who are abstinence only kind of mindset for sex education. You go to school, and school is, we tell you, don't do it, or you're going to have a baby and your life's going to be terrible. But by the way, if when you're 18 you get married and have a baby, it'll be totally fine. So yeah. No, you're 100% right, man. Like, much love to all my fellow natural bodybuilders and the people who put on the shows, and I don't want to be disrespectful of them. But sometimes I do roll my eyes at like some of the speeches that are given, or some of the ideas, or like, you know, and so here's, I think we do fuel some of the more self-righteous natural bodybuilders, some of that disconnect and like, I'm not part of that. I don't even care about them, or actively dislike that side of the sport in the enhanced ranks, because there are people who believe it is a moral failure or downright immoral to be enhanced, or that it goes against what bodybuilding is, and that, you know, only natural bodybuilding is healthy, which, let's be honest, it's healthier, but it's a sport. As soon as you put competitive in something, people are going to take it as far as they can, you know, like whether you're Bobby Fischer, whether you're Ronnie Coleman, you probably took it too far, you know? And that's something that is just human nature. And, you know, there were people doing crazy shit before roids existed in the name of strength and physique. So, no, I think it's great. And I absolutely know what you're talking about. I know I'm kind of bouncing around, but you know, just because we're in the natural bodybuilding community doesn't mean that Alberto and I don't have a ton of friends, colleagues, no fellow coaches, have done, you know, podcasts with, spoken at conferences, and had very candid conversations with folks on the other side of the fence. And I can't tell you how often I hear horror stories of, you know, a bikini competitor or a novice figure competitor who is told by their coach, with basically the same level of concern about, you know, deciding to cut carbs by 25 grams, to put them for the first time on pharmaceuticals. And, you know, no conflict of interest at all. By the way, I can also be your source and I'll sell it to you. Yeah. So, you know, and I think when you're in that power dynamic, your coach is someone you trust. They're your only entrance and knowledge of how to do this thing right, which thank God is changing with the internet, but not everyone is necessarily, you know, all over our YouTube channel or anything like that. When you have someone you trust who's guiding you, and they make it seem like just jumping on some Anavar when you're 12 weeks out is just as consequential as deciding to go lower in fats or to add more cardio. And then you find out, oh, but I have a deeper voice for the rest of my life now. Like, that's not cool, but it happens much more often than I think people realize.
And the messed up part is that, you know, usually it's halfway through a prep. Because I mean, think about it, the first time you were 6-8 weeks out, like, oh, those nerves start hitting you. And you want to do all sorts of stupid things to get in shape. You know, you want to slash your calories on a weekly basis, you know, add these ungodly amounts of cardio. So those people are usually in those positions where they're hearing the footsteps, they're a bit nervous, and that decision was made when, you know, they're just not in the best state of mind to make such a big decision. You know, it's different when
out of fear and desperation.
When you even have this conversation,
they trust recommending it, 100%.
Yeah.
Hey 3DMJers, this is Andrea Valdez here to tell you all about the 3DMJ Vault VIP membership. You can get all access to every single course we've ever made for just $12.99 per month for a limited time at 3dmjvault.com. Until recently, you could only purchase one course at a time at the full price, which currently can cost up to $68. But now, with this new VIP membership, you can have full access to everything we've ever made for one low monthly rate. That means you can watch all the videos and get all of the document downloads for courses like the lifting library, transitioning away from tracking, the Godfather's Guide to Posing, our full fat loss Q&A series, and so much more. Again, that's all 13 video courses for only $12.99 per month for a limited time. As with everything we make in the vault, the price will increase as we add more courses and content over time. So the sooner you subscribe, the more money you'll save every month. Go to 3dmjvault.com, select the VIP membership, and sign yourself up today.
So, I mean, it's a big call, and it's not one that you want to make on the fly. It's something that, I think the people who I know of who have gone down that route and they've done in the most responsible of ways, it's like they usually planned it out for a good chunk of time. And it was usually in the off season when, they were well fed. They didn't, feel any, like the shadow of any deadline. And they had the proper guidance. Like they shopped around for that sort of guidance. And quite often some of those people, I've known a few who they've looked into it enough, actually myself kind of included, where at the end I was like, you know what, this is probably not for me. But yeah, usually most people's, from my experience, their first cycle comes like usually in the middle of a prep where they're a little behind the curve and they don't want to, it's their first show or fairly early in their career and they don't want to make a fool out of themselves.
Yep. Yeah. I just think whatever decision someone makes, and I don't have any judgment towards it, it should be made with considerable forethought of not only how you feel about it now, but how the future you predict in various versions might think about it. And it should be something informed by people who have already walked that road, It shouldn't be the process of what kind of rationalizations can I make to make this okay currently, because I'm really nervous about something and I want this to be the fix to it, which is ultimately, I think, how it often happens. And that is something you can't really unpull the trigger on, if you then want to compete in natural bodybuilding without waiting, 5 to 10 years, depending on the federation, which, for a competitor, like if you just made a rash decision being 5 weeks out, being told you got to wait 5 years, that can sometimes be, the decision that goes, okay, well, I guess I'm going full into the anabolics now, which I've definitely seen, and we've seen that on the powerlifting side as well. Someone takes a tainted supplement and then goes, well, fuck it, I'm just going to compete on that side. The next thing you do, you look up 2 years and their total's gone up by 200 pounds. And you're like, I guess it was just the pre-workout supplement, but now that they got a lifetime ban or a multi-year ban, now they're full on that the other enhanced side of the train, which is super interesting,
Yeah. No, I'm glad it's you and me having this convo because you and I we grew up in an era with more conflict, and I think compared to Brad and Jeff, we're a little bit more open to certain experiences. Like that's just our personality type. So, I mean, we've both had this tug of war where, we didn't necessarily know where our bodybuilding journey would end up, but we also had a lot of information in regards to the natural side of things and what that looked like. And I think that really helped shape our decisions. And man, that's just the main thing we're trying to do here is we're not trying to, knock on people's doors and convert them. We just want to tell you what's up over here. And, it might be for you, might not be for you. And that's okay.
Yep. Bless Jeff and Brad's hearts. I mean, Jeff probably had nightmares about what would happen if he smoked a cigarette once in his life when he was a child. And that man, it's difficult to get him to put more than ketchup on a burger. So I don't ever think the question, and no, actually I know, I've talked to him about it. He's never been tempted. It's just he knew that was not for him. He is very a linear, straight edge type guy, and that's just always been him. And Brad, that Catholic boy, I mean, come on. He feels guilty just about existing. So, I mean, how are you going to expect him to actually, hop on an illegal substance? So, yeah, I think, it's definitely, we've had different conversations with them. I remember early on when we decided like, okay, so we're going to coach athletes and we want to work with natural athletes, but are we cool if someone applies and they're not a natural athlete and they want, training and nutrition to work with us so long as they're not competing in a natural show? And that was an extended conversation, know, and ultimately what it came down to is, well, hold on, like if we have a team dietitian, if we have a, like a physical therapist, if we have if we have a mandate, we have a mental health specialist, a licensed therapist, right? And we feel that needs to be in place if someone comes to us with, certain contraindications or certain medication or medical background, but we're okay with someone who's, basically self-prescribing, anabolics, but we're not endocrinologists, nor do we have one on staff. We're like, okay, so the professional responsible decision is to recommend them to someone who does have this experience. And that's what we eventually landed on. But I just think it's interesting that we did come from a different mentality. You and I, in our young, relatively ignorant youth, before we thought about having an RD, a therapist, and a DPT on staff, before I even finished my bachelor's degree, we were like, yeah, I don't see any problem with that. Like, I'm happy to write a program for a dude on gear. Yeah. And Jeff and Brad were like, hold the phone. And I'm glad we had their voice in this conversation for sure. Because I think ultimately we came to was probably the right decision.
Yeah. It was our more, I guess, like younger liberal spirit. Like it was, I'm glad we had the more conservative older gentlemen on staff, because we were always kind of like the dreamers in regards to the 3D muscle journey. It's like, let's shoot from the hip in the dark. What's the worst that can happen, right? Sort of deal. And actually, like without going too much off topic, remember we helped a friend at some point, and it made us realize how lost we were in regards to that world. And it was exhausting. It was a lot of things, and we were like, you know what, I think we're done with this. Like, it's different to, give a friend who's enhanced a few one-liners on a dumbbell press or, a squat form, but it's totally different to, try to help them out throughout the course of a contest prep, as we learned. So no, Matt, I mean, especially the people who do it right. I mean, shout out to John Meadows, rest in peace. Like, when it came to all the stuff he had to manage on that end, it's like, to me, you can't help but there's a part of you that's like, wow, it's like you got the training stuff down, you got the nutritional stuff down, and there's this whole other world that you have to be aware of in order to be effective in that competitive world of natural bodybuilding. So just kudos to those people who do it right, who know everything they do know, because it's quite impressive. I mean, we took one little glance down that rabbit hole and it freaked us out, and we got out of there as quickly as we could.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's one of the times that is why I roll my eyes sometimes when you hear the whole the rigmarole about enhanced bodybuilding actually being like a cop-out and an easier way to go. And I'm like, actually, now you're manipulating far more variables. Like, this is so much simplified when you're doing the natural route. And for the people, especially at the highest level, like, I mean, my God, I've heard just how much people have to eat to get that big.
Yes.
It's a whole nother game. I think people just don't understand what it is to bulk when you're trying to go from 260 to 280, and then just, managing peak week, all that stuff. Shout out to the folks who are over at RP. I've talked to Dr. McIsratel about super supplementation, and there's definitely a lot of blind spots in my knowledge, as there should be, and yeah. I'm fine with that. I don't have time to dedicate to learning pharmacy on top of everything I have learned. So yeah, I think that is that's one of those things that I think is also something worth dispelling. It's a big decision, and it is the harder path, if anything, and where you are wrestling with trying to make decisions that are going to potentially impact your health, but still trying to be competitive and having that internal dialogue. It's certainly not easy. So no disrespect at all. And like you said, I think ultimately this is a conversation about people just having a more realistic perspective on what are the pathways, and I'm just glad to see that the INBF, WNBF is doing well. There were multiple times in the last, 15 years where the sport was either more fractured or there really was not like really good international, high level competitions available. Like some of the people, and I mean no disrespect to anyone when I say this, and this is coming from someone who has a pro card in one organization, but has not yet been able to get my pro card as a WNBF pro, just to kind of show you just there's really levels to this, and there are issues with how fractured the natural bodybuilding community is competitively. So there were times where people who were, let's say, winning certain quote unquote international world level events as a pro would probably place, say, barely make top 10 in the current WNBF pro lineup right now. I'm not going to name any organizations because I really don't want to throw shade. And ultimately, I'm glad those organizations exist and provide that platform. But yeah, I mean, I've had athletes compete in certain organizations in pro divisions, and they're one of two folks competing in the pro division,
Yeah.
And when we're talking about worlds, we're talking about 200 to 300 competitors from 60 different countries now? Or sorry, excuse me, where 60% of those 200 to 300 competitors are not from the US. So it's grown, it's gotten better. And I think the sheer numbers game is cool, because then you do start to see what does that genetic elite look like, and how much do talent, quote unquote, genetics play a role. And that's something I think people are acutely aware of on the enhanced side of the sport, because now it's not like, oh, nah, bro, he's just on a bunch of gear. Sometimes people talk about, oh, he is on more gear or he's on less. But when you look at, say, the IFBB Mr. Olympia, that they've either gone through NPC Nationals or they've gone through IFBB World Championships, and they are, if they're not American, they're probably one of the top 5 bodybuilders in their country. And now they're coming over to compete in the Olympia, and everyone else who's American has won pro shows or placed in the top 3 this last year. And then you can see what divides people, and you're like, oh my God, this is like a dog show. Like these people all fit a specific breed. No one's over 5'10". Everyone has short arms. Everyone's got a tiny waist. Everyone has broad clavicles. Everyone's lats insert into their butt. Everyone's glutes insert into the back of their knee, and it is this great example of how at a high level a sport selects for certain characteristics, and that is typically not seen in these smaller natural bodybuilding federations. There was definitely a time period, and I know myself and Brad have talked about this, where we felt like if you get striated glutes, there's 80% chance if you do 3 shows, you're going to become pro that season, just because there's not that kind of depth of competition. And it's only changed recently. And now I think what you really see at the pro level in some of the larger organizations, notably the INBF, WNBF, that is where you really get that opportunity to okay, at first I got to get a pro card. Second, I got to qualify for Worlds. And then if you're placing top 5 or even top 10, I will say, at Worlds in the pro division, the internet's not going to like you if you post your physique. You're going to get one of 2 comments. Either the bodybuilding community is going to say you're small, or everyone else is going to say you're on gear. So there's no winning for you. But we appreciate you, dear top elite level bodybuilders. I tell you that much.
Yeah, I mean, what do you expect I guess an elite drug-free guy to look like? And it's going to look like an IFBB pro, just shrunken down. You know, it's like these are, and we've actually seen this. There's a lot of guys who decide to go down that route.
Yeah.
Who I wouldn't say it was a cakewalk, but we're like, yeah, he's probably going to get that card. And they usually end up getting that card. And then they usually end up placing quite well. So, I mean, it's same freaks, just I don't know, just different shirt they're wearing, essentially.
Actually, I'm really glad you brought that up, because it's easy to talk about one direction there. People who were natural and were a prominent natural pro and then went on to compete as an IFBB pro. Because it shows you that there is a certain level of genetic talent in the natural bodybuilding. And it also shows you the effect of drugs, because these are the same people that previously were called out for being fake natties, like we all do, like we all get. But often less talked about are people who used to be IFBB pros and then decided, I want to get off that for health reasons or whatever reasons. And then they decided to, wait out their ban period and then compete, which I think is far less common. And also people, I wouldn't be comfortable bringing up anyone like that by name, because it's such a dirty stigma attached to it,
Yes. Yeah.
There is just the assumption that you have this huge competitive advantage, despite the fact that if you were on gear for 10 years, you probably shut down your natural production to a good degree. Whatever you want to say about mechanistic studies on satellite cells and, muscle memory, which is still not even fully elucidated and not shown in all studies, just as a note. We also know that, if your natural testosterone production was like, let's say 800, and then you were on like heavy doses of gear for 8 years, it probably is lower than that now, perhaps permanently. So anyway, first let's talk about that former category. For those who don't know, Kai Green, I would argue an uncrowned Mr. Olympia, potentially not getting that nod because of just the way he's seen, and he's very artistic, expressive, unique, and his potential association with a certain fruit. I really do think he deserved to at least once win the Olympia. I think at his best and at Phil's best, I would give the nod to Kai. I really do think he has Ronnie Coleman-esque lines with some better parts. Maybe not quite as good a back, but definitely from the front with his quads and his waist. Anyway, my opinion, is just that, an opinion. But nonetheless, worst case scenario, second best bodybuilder in the world at his time. That gentleman won every single WNBF pro show before he decided, you know what, I want to go on the other side of the sport. Got his pro card through the NPC Team Universe, the one tested route to get it. And by the way, he competed around 190 when he was like 18, 19 in WNBF. Competed around 200 to 210, if I recall correctly, when he was on the NPC Team Universe circuit. And then on the Olympia stage, what is he, 270?
Yeah.
260 to 270? I might be a little bit wrong. But I think that tells you something. Like, if you are already on a significant amount of gear, there's nothing you can do to put another 40 pounds on. Obviously there's a dose response. I'm not trying to be ignorant, but like there's an 80-pound difference here. And point being, this was someone who was at the elite level in natural bodybuilding and then went on to be at the elite level in IFBB pro bodybuilding. A more contemporary example would be Sean Clarita, who I saw compete when I competed in the 2009 Pro-Am show that Leroy Perry put on in Sacramento. That was my last show of the season. Really good experience. And I saw Kurt Widener and Sean Clarita battle it out. One of them won the heavyweights, Kurt, of course. And Sean Clarita at, I think, 125 to 130 pounds. Is that his stage weight back then? Yeah. Short guy, but incredibly muscled, was known as the giant killer back then, and just barely got edged out by Kurt. And this is someone who was going toe-to-toe regularly with Brian Whitaker for that lightweight title, and has won the lightweight pro world title in the WNBF multiple times. So considered one of the best natural bodybuilders of his age, and is now went on to win the is it under 220? I'm forgetting the weight division.
212, I believe.
Excuse me.
Yeah, under 212.
Yeah, he won under 212 Olympia at a body weight of, I think, 175 pounds. So, earlier I said added 80 pounds to their physique. Again, that's for this typical 5'6", 5'7", 5'8" bodybuilder. Sean is much shorter than that, and he put 50 pounds of muscle on. So again, just a great example of you're right. They are just smaller IFBB pros at a certain level. And it is pretty cool if you go and look at Sean Clarita's competitive career. And I think he's still looking amazing. And I really hope that he stays healthy and can keep competing at a high level in the IFBB.
And he's getting better year after year. And it's to the point that I think now, like if Big Ramy wasn't in the open class, like for Sean, it wouldn't be out of the question for him to try to pull like a Lee Priest, 2.0 and like, hey, let me jump into that open. Because he won an open show at some point this year. Again, and Sean wasn't always winning at the WNBF. Like he was always right up there with the top dogs. But, we had a few guys that were going back and forth with Sean. So it just kind of shows you what sort of talent pool we do have there.
Exactly.
Shoot, I'd say a lot of this is where actually a little off topic, but I think a lot of the natural freaks that try to make the jump, it's not that wonderful for everyone. And I think a lot of it has to do, because when I look at both Kai and I look at Sean, what they both had around them is they just had a good community and good guidance. So when they did decide to go down that route, like they had, I'm sure, a lot of, people who were well equipped with the knowledge, and they were able to do it right. Usually, like, you know how it goes, it's like the top dogs in like natural feds. It's like, guess what? Like, I've heard of guys that, 1 year they tried keto, they were shredded, won a world championship. The next year they're like, you know what? I'm going to go low fat, same deal. I'm gonna cut sodium, looks awesome. It doesn't matter what they do, right? And those folks, so they're like, all right, let me try to go down that route. Since they're just kind of used to being their own guy, they don't really have a team around them. And you can just tell as like that version of them evolves that it's like, oh, this kind of looks like an amateur job, basically, because we've seen that just as much where, certain individuals try to go down that route, and it doesn't work out. It just looks like they were just throwing random darts at the board, which kind of playing off that is, I think, one of the reasons that me personally, like, I think it'd be a wonderful experiment. It's never going to happen. But like, I would be, if I had the funding to, like, I won the Colorado State Lottery, like I have 70 million in my bank account, I would totally throw a show at some point. And I'm like, hey, like, everyone's welcomed. You can be off your stuff for 6 months. And then I think a lot of the people would see just how formidable the physiques are at the on the natural side. I've only seen it once where someone has gone deep down that route, does an about face, and it works out for them. And honestly, I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that he just based off certain things that this individual did, they happen to be just a very, I guess, like, patient person, because they waited out the full, I think it was 7 years at the time, before deciding to try the drug-free feds. And that's the only story where I've seen it work. I might have shared this story before, but I remember this was during that era in baseball where everyone was getting popped for using, and no one could get their stuff. So I remember all my gym heroes just kind of disintegrated into like nothing. And it was like, for me at the time, like the most terrible thing to watch actually happen before my eyes. So it's a different skill set both ways. Like, I think, and they're both to be respected, because we've seen people mess it up on both ends, like trying to go natty, or, being a powerhouse natty and trying to go enhanced, and and it hasn't worked out for them.
So Berto, you were talking about the idea of just paying a bunch of IFBB pros to go clean for 6 months so we could see what it would look like if they went off cold turkey. That sort of happened back in 1990. I don't know if you remember this, but Mike Ashley,
infamous Olympia.
Yes, well, Arnold Classic. So Mike Ashley won the Arnold Classic, and Mike Ashley was always a good IFBB pro at the time, but we're talking about a hyper competitive era of IFBB pro bodybuilding. Sean Ray, Kevin Lervone, Dorian Yates. We're talking about the late 80s, early 90s, just a ton of killers. This is arguably, in my opinion, maybe not the height of the Mass Monster era. That would come a few years later when everyone was trying to catch up with Ronnie. But I would say the point where everyone was still pretty damn big, but really bringing it was the first era of like really good conditioning. Rich Gaspari had influenced that, and also great separation. People were peaking well, and also extremely big. So Mike Ashley, I want to say he's like 5'8", 5'9", and competes in the low 190s, if I recall correctly. So like really big, comparable to some of the biggest natural bodybuilders, and you'd think you'd have to be, really genetically elite if you were natural. And the point is, Mike Ashley has always claimed he was natural. A lot of people did not believe him because he's competing, neck and neck with Sean Ray and all these folks, and placing decently mid-level in the IFBB. So after the prominent death of Andreas Munzer from diuretics, they announced that they're going to drug test, and they will actually enforce drug testing in a few 1990 shows, notably the Arnold Classic, which is kind of the biggest one after the Olympia. And everyone comes in so off that year. They're losing weight. They don't know how to peak. They're used to being on whatever compounds they're taking. I'm not going to pretend to know everyone's drug stack or anything like that. But who looks exactly the same, if not better? Mike Ashley. And I believe, if I recall correctly, Sean Ray actually got popped at the 1990 Arnold Classic, lost the title or lost his position, and Mike Ashley got awarded the winner. I might have that slightly off, but it's a really interesting like time period where this basically happened. There was enough pressure because it was during that same era that you were talking about, late 80s, early 90s, of, where steroids are being villainized in sport the most. And you combine that with the high profile death of an IFBB pro bodybuilder. And then you have, Arnold, who is, a public figure. So all of those arguably political pressures came at the same time. And, there you go. So I think Sean Ray learned like a week after the competition that he lost because he failed the drug test. But anyway, it's just really interesting to see that there may have actually been, and at certain eras where maybe the size wasn't quite as emphasized, because I do think like during this period you could get pretty far having a smaller but really symmetrical and really well peaked, highly separated physique. And Mike Ashley was one of those guys that most likely was drug-free, competed as an IFBB pro, and was successful. And he actually was the one person who did not look the same as everyone else, who seemed to have slid back in even just that 1 year of drug testing. So I think that's really interesting. And I met Mike Ashley when I was at the NSCA conference back in, it was 2016 or 2017. But this is a guy who is highly dedicated to the craft. So I believe Mike is in his either late 50s or early 60s now. I hope he's not listening and thinking like, hey, I'm not that old. But just massive respect. That's all I got. I shook his hand. He's a legend, so I was really pleased to meet him. But Dr. Mike Zerdos, another Mike, he says, Mike Ashley actually attended some of my classes just to learn about periodization. He would take classes on this stuff. He's active in the NSCA. So this is someone who is, for his whole time period, been dedicated to the craft of lifting and learning, is an active personal trainer, and is always claimed natural, and is, he's not spending his time learning about pharmaceuticals. He's spending his time learning about the science of lifting, and took his physique extremely far. And I think he's probably one of the best natural bodybuilders of all time. It's just that he was hanging with folks who were on a little more than creatine. So that's just an interesting story. And it's just to kind of give some validity to what you're saying, where I think people would be surprised how quickly some of the effects of gear does fade when you're on a high dose and you go off it. So yeah, no, I totally agree. And then to give another anecdote, which I acknowledge that's all these are. So we talked about how there are notable examples like Kai and Sean Carita, who went from the natural side to the enhanced side, but that it's difficult to bring up people going the other way because it's kind of considered taboo, and I'm not trying to put any on blast. However, Jeff Alberts, when he won a pro show, he actually just edged out the person who placed second, I think, in his weight class, who used to be an IFBB pro and a national champion from their country. And, if you looked at that lineup, it wouldn't be like, whoa, this guy is way bigger than everybody else. He was actually, I would say, on the smaller side of the physiques, but very symmetrical. And like you said, looks like a smaller IFBB pro, has, good lines, great symmetry, really well developed, and, came in lean, knows how to do the bodybuilding thing. But this is someone who spent, I think, 10 years away from the sport, got off anabolics, and then decided, I still want to compete. And now that I meet the criteria, decided to get into natural bodybuilding. So I think, people really get up in arms about the concept of previously being on anabolics and then coming into the sport, because there's this preconceived notion that it must give you some massive competitive advantage. But the academic, scientific, true answer to that is that we don't know if it does. What we would actually need is a bunch of comparative studies with a large sample, not even comparative studies, but a comparative analysis, where we take people who were on a certain amount of gear, we looked at how big they were at their peak, and then saw how it changed over time, and then compare them to people who have been lifetime drug-free. And just because there are potential mechanisms of muscle memory, and there might be a time course, we don't know the actual time course by which those adaptations start to fade, or whether those local adaptations in muscle that may, allow you to gain more muscle than you otherwise would have theoretically, based on like myonuclear domain theory. Does that offset the fact that, like I mentioned earlier, you might have suppressed your endogenous testosterone production because of all those years doing that? So it's almost like a catch-22, and it does make you wonder that if you took enough to get those permanent adaptations that allow you to always have a competitive advantage from anabolics, well, there's other side effects and feedback loops from anabolics that might give you a negative. So I don't know how that plays out. But ultimately, the anecdote of that competitor who Jeff beat as a lifetime natural versus someone who used to be a IFBB pro, I think tells you that the current rules are probably sufficient to allow for a level playing field.
By the way, I was right behind him in that lineup. So Jeff got second, he got third, and I got fourth.
So you lost because he used to be on gear, is what you're saying?
That's what I told myself. Yeah. But with him, you could actually see. Actually, no. To be honest, I think that year I should have edged him out. But 2 years later, you could see him actually learn how to play that instrument. Like you could tell he was still trying to figure out some stuff, and he slowly just got a little bit better and was able to preserve just a little bit more muscle with every prep. So, again,
Berto,
both ways
that's
there's a learning
impossible.
curve.
If he used to be on gear, that means when he competed off gear, he was at the peak he could have possibly been natural, actually enhanced. So getting better from there is impossible. So I know you're lying now, and you are also a fake natty just by association. No, but that's really interesting, because I think that is something I've definitely observed talking to coaches and talking to enhanced athletes, is they are much more willing, probably from positive feedback, to push things way harder than we would in contest prep, because they can salvage it and they can get leaner faster without losing muscle mass. There's a reason why shorter contest preps are kind of the norm in that side of the world, is because it doesn't have an obvious negative, where, we've seen the whole era where 16-week preps were long preps, and nobody got in shape. And the people who did always looked over-dieted, which is kind of the remnant of why we sometimes have these conversations of, oh, no, you can't get that lean and still look full. It's like, well, yeah, you can if you just don't crash diet. But I think that is something that I don't pretend to know what this gentleman's prep was like or how it changed. But obviously, it sounds like he got better at preserving muscle mass, and doing contest prep better and figuring out the recipe for his body, which you'd think someone who had been an IFBB pro would have already figured out that recipe. And he probably had, but just for an enhanced physique, and it is different.
Yeah. No, it's difficult either way, man, to do well in bodybuilding, and you're going to have to, just be a student of the game. Like that is for sure on either side. So, but yeah, props to him, man. Like I actually, as we talk about this at some point, I'd love to sit down with him and just chat it up with him, because he knows what both sides are like, and there's not a whole lot of people that can say that I was at the top of my sport on, when it comes to like the two varieties you have to pick from.
No, absolutely. So yeah, I think this has been an enlightening conversation, and again, I really just appreciate that video. When I saw it on our I knew you were working on it because you mentioned it in one of our meetings, but when I actually saw it on our YouTube, I stopped what I was doing and I watched it, and I thought it was awesome. The background music, the filming. I've always thought you've got a great eye for like capturing physiques in their most impressive way. That is still very honest. Like you're not like, oh, let me get some top-down lighting. Like you're able just to show what it is like to actually be there. Because you'll hear, like if you ever get into a debate with someone about who should have placed where, and you're always basing it on pictures or video, someone will always pop in and say it's different in person. You didn't see what the judges saw. Yeah. And to the point where sometimes it's kind of like, shut up, man. Like that's an excuse. It's not. It can be, but it truly is not the case. Like things look way different in person. There's a certain level of detail that you can see that, like you don't have to change the quality settings to 4K when you're in person. You just see what it's like, right? You can move your angle. You see when they move to different areas of lighting. You see them before they get on stage, when they get off. You watch their individual routine. And there's just so much more to be seen. And I think even more than that, when you're backstage and you go from totally different lighting, you can see even more detail, because the lighting on stage is both like great and bad. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
it's meant for the judges. Like the judges have the best seat in the house. Like they can see everything, but it kind of short sells everyone behind them usually.
Absolutely. Yeah. And sometimes they will have lighting that actually makes them look worse than they would in normal lighting. But that makes it very apparent to the judges what you look like. So like sometimes I'm not a fan of bottom lighting, because I do think it's important to present everyone's, physique in a way that is interesting and exciting for the fans of the sport as well. But yeah, really close up bottom lighting for a judge, it's a level playing field. Everyone's being lit from the bottom and it's a lot of light. That's great. But I do think it makes people objectively look worse. But yeah, it like if you don't have dark enough color, if you are just not quite in shape, you will look worse in stage lighting than not. Unless it's just really good stage lighting. Like there's some places that everyone looks better. Like for example, like at Chabot College, that NPC show, whether it's, California or if it's Contra Costa, everyone looks amazing. I don't know why. But typically backstage, you can see different details. And I thought you captured that really well, which is really cool to see.
Yeah, no, awesome. I look forward to getting more of those out and recruiting some folks for our side, because a lot of people don't catch the memo. So hopefully, maybe there's a young person here or there that it inspires to, hey, like take their talent down this route. That's in our mission statement, man. And I can't wait to do more of that.
Right on, man. Well, folks, if you haven't seen it, check out our YouTube. That is youtube.com/team3dmj. And then check out the video by Berto. It's only 7 minutes long. And I think half of that is just Berto's beautiful face, giving a nice prelude. But then you get into the true impressive elite physiques. And just do yourself a favor if you're already a fan of natural bodybuilding. Don't scroll down and read the comments, because anytime there's a natural bodybuilding video on YouTube, it's going to be a shit show. So you know that. Don't ruin your day. Just watch the video and enjoy. What's going on, 3DMJers? Eric Helms here. Thanks for listening to our podcast. I just want to take a second to tell you about MASS, Monthly Applications in Strength Sport. This is a monthly research review that I put out with Greg Nuckols, Dr. Mike Zerdos, and Dr. Eric Trexler. We cover the most up-to-date, peer-reviewed research in the world of strength and physique sport that's directly relevant to your practice as a coach or an athlete. We provide our reviews in written format, but also, since you enjoy our podcast, in audio roundtable reviews where we discuss the research in depth. Finally, we also do video concept reviews where we cover a broader topic in video format for your learning. For fitness professionals, you can take quizzes on MASS content and earn continuing education credits for most of the biggest certifying bodies in the fitness industry. If you want to sign up and get a subscription, head over to 3dmusclejourney.com and click on the products tab. Thanks for your time, and thanks for listening.